Welcome and aloha, everyone. My name is Craig Hobbs, and I'm indeed a solution consultant here at PagerDuty. And for today's office hours, we'll be talking about how to get started building your own custom Rundeck plugin. Plugins are a key ingredient of the Rundeck platform, and they allow developers to customize the behaviors and the various core services of Rundeck. Everything from notifications to the workflow services to logging events and every behavior in between, including UI. Plugins are an incredibly powerful tool that are easy to develop and provide maximum flexibility in Rundeck. And while there are many different development options and utilities for working with plugins in Rundeck, we'll use our time today to lay the groundwork for getting developers started with some of the initial context and tools around plugin development. So for our agenda in this office session, we'll start by doing a quick brief overview of what Rundeck is and what role plugins play. We'll then dive into the plugin system, talk about some of the different types of plugins and plugin objects. After that, we'll begin looking at some of the basic internal structure of a plugin, rounding it out with some of the getting started suggestions that I would make for developers who are jumping into the plugin system and starting their first development project. And then finally, we'll move over and start up a live example. So I will go into a live example of plugin development, and then after which we will open the floor for questions and feedback. So with that as our agenda, let's go ahead and get started and start a little bit with just some overview of Rundeck. So Rundeck is if you're new to the Rundeck platform, Rundeck is an open source platform that helps DevOps engineers, SREs, developers, and support engineers define, build, and deploy automation workflows. The platform provides orchestration for managing your operations and servers in hybrid environments, be you on-prem or cloud. It allows you to integrate with modern DevOps tools and practices for orchestrating across all of your automation scripts, APIs, system calls, and other automation tool sets. With Rundeck, anyone can safely execute procedures that were previously only allowed by your subject matter experts. After setting the groundwork of just what Rundeck is, and many of you who have come to this are probably already familiar with Rundeck is, now what we want to talk about is what is a plugin. So at base, a plugin is a file that contains an implementation of some provider's functionality for a particular Rundeck service. In the simplest form and the most commonly used form, a plugin is a file that provides a wrapper around your utilities and allows you to represent a script in a job or workflow step. Out of the box, Rundeck provides users with over 100 free community plugins, with additional plugins available as part of our enterprise-only version. Now let's look at the plugin ecosystem. Here we have a few example plugins across job workflows, node executors, notifications, and other core service areas of Rundeck. Most every feature, even UI elements that you see in the Rundeck platform, are implemented as plugins. So that means for most every option you see in Rundeck, you could create your own custom wrapper with your own implementation to enhance or customize the behavior of the Rundeck platform. Plugins typically have a specific function, so that means they generally don't require change or updates with revisions of services or utilities that they represent. Rundeck provides you with the critical service integrations needed to execute all of these automation steps easily, reliably, and securely. So why write a plugin? With all of the hundreds of plugins now available in Rundeck, users are now looking to understand where I get the value of actually contributing to the community or developing just my own for my organization or department. Well, plugins provide many different benefits. First and foremost, a friendly interface for your job writers. All of your job steps now can have references to titles and inputs that your job writers will recognize instantly. You can allow for custom inputs and outputs to your plugins. So if you're looking for a specific output or format of that output, you can create that in your plugin and provide it as a reusable object across different projects or different job workflows. Plugins also provide a loose coupling with application services. so you can quickly and easily develop new integrations with other third-party services or homegrown services without worrying about versions or changes of the software or applications themselves. Also, plugins are part of the Rundeck community, and with a strong community backing, you can now interact with other users and other developers to create plugins around your ecosystem that help enhance your overall automation workflow. So the desire to develop plugins with our user base is quite high, and there's a great community and support around it. There are three ways you can develop a plugin. The first is through Java code development. This requires a Java code distribution within a jar file. The second is a Groovy plugin development, which incorporates Groovy script for notification and logging plugins. And then the most popular is script plugins, which provide you the ability to wrap those scripts you already use today in a nice interface and easy select options. So let's look at a script source type plugin. I've mentioned that the script plugin gives developers that ability to create an interface around the scripts they already have today and expose them within the Rundeck platform. But it also lets you develop a plugin in any language you choose. As long as the specific interpreter is available on the target execution node, developers can develop plugin in any language of their choosing. If you're a Python developer, if your plugin calls for other types of languages, whether you prefer Java or whether you just prefer Bash shell scripting, you can now use your plugin. You can now develop plugins in that core language to support your specific workflow needs. I want to look a little bit as we turn to the plugin development environment and talk about the basic structure of a plugin. The directory structure of the plugin is very simple. It requires only 3 levels for constructing the plugin file. Starting with the root directory, which will be the same name of the plugin, it will contain, first and foremost, the plugin.yaml, which is all the metadata for declaring the implementation of our plugin. Next, at the root level, we'll have a subfolder marked contents. And in our contents, this will contain all of the metadata for our implementation. This will contain all of the scripts, for our implementation. So as I talk about wrapping your scripts, here's where you will put all of those DevOps scripts and developments that you've done for executing as part of your plugin. And also we have a subfolder named resources. The resources folder will hold any UI elements or icons that you want to have as part of attributes that you will view in the UI with your plugin. The final delivery of the plugin is a zip archive file with the same name as our root directory. So a very simple structure made up of 2 folders and a key file for describing the plugin and any scripts that you have. Let's zoom in on that plugin.yaml file that actually describes the declaration of your plugin implementation. Here I have a very basic example of my plugin.yaml, starting with the very first section, which is the main metadata required for my plugin. You'll see I have various attributes listed there, from name and version and providers. All of these identify the plugin to Rundeck. The name of the plugin, Hello World, in my case, the version of the plugin that I'm deploying, and the name of the plugin version that I'm using. Current version type right now is 1.2. I believe we are moving to 2.0 here very soon. There are other attributes in the plugin that are very useful, but not required. Listings such as author, date, URL make the context of the plugin and reusability from a community standpoint quite good. So now I can share this plugin. I know when this plugin was updated, when it was revved, what URL I could go to get more information, but certainly not required. If you're interested in a full listing of some of the optional values, you can certainly go out to the rundeck.com plugin development site and see a full listing of all the different attributes that could be involved in the main plugin. But we're focusing on the key ones that we need, and right now that is the naming of the plugin and the various version information. Turning now to the section below, and this is our provider section. So our provider section will list the implementation that we will use for this plugin and the service type in Rundeck that it will be declared for. So in this particular case, I've given my plugin the name of Hello Bash. So that is how it will be reflected in the Rundeck UI. The service type is remote script node step. And this is the core Rundeck service type that my plugin will be deployed and declared for. I mentioned there are a few other service types that you could work with, everything from notifications to webhooks to other workflow services and project level categories. Anything that's available as part of the Rundeck service core. There's a full listing of these as well inside of the Rundeck plugin development documentation site. I'm then defining my implementation type. In this case, it is a script. So this lets Rundeck know that I will be executing a script. And to that, I have an associated area where I will be keeping my scripts. I also have an arguments section. Again, this would be more on that optional side. If your script requires arguments, the wrapper I'm putting around it, if it requires an arguments, this would be on that optional side. But I've actually declared an argument for my sample script here as well. And my script file that I'm using, helloworld.sh, that is the script I'll be executing, and that'll be placed into that contents directory that I spoke about. The final section of the provider lets you declare the configuration attributes for your implementation. So this would define all of the inputs and outputs. This will define all the inputs to the script, the various types of inputs, any defaults that you'd be looking to add, and any other specific UI rendering, any UI rendering types that would be needed. So in this particular case, I'll have a configuration value that actually allows me, that I will name value from user. So that is the value that will be identified for this particular configuration. I'm calling it of type script. Rundeck plugin development allows you to have several different types, everything from dates, passwords, multi-select options, etc. Each one has its own special rendering option within the UI. So for passwords, for instance, the input would be obfuscated, so you wouldn't actually see what's typed in, for example. I can now give my configuration value a title. So in this case, I'm just calling it simply user input. So now when I go into the UI, I'll see a simple title box that says user input. I can also give it a description, and that description follows the title input of the input string. Again, several different attributes here are optional, and there are several different attributes you can continue to add to grow out your config input. So imagining now you are a user and you want to capture these custom inputs for your users and builders to create their job steps in Rundeck. Turning now over to the script that I will actually run. For my example, I've created a very simple hello world script. So this is one of those mini scripts I have as a DevOps engineer that I'd love to now wrap and place into Rundeck for reusability, but I also want to give it custom inputs that my builders can now drive my script and input. In my script, I'm actually gathering some information from the server that it will be dispatched to. So I'm gathering the host name. And then I'm also just taking a simple value from the user's input that will come from the builder of the workflow step. And we'll see that as we deploy this plugin. Finally, after packaging all of my plugin information into my zip archive, I can easily deploy the plugin into the Rundeck libext directory. This is part of your Rundeck base install. So if you're deploying along with me, if you're deploying this, you'll have your Rundeck base install. And within the base, there is a directory that holds all of the plugins for the platform. And that is within the beneath the libext directory. You will simply place your new plugin archive in that directory. And after placing it, Job Builder, it will instantly be enabled and your job builders can start using it. It doesn't require a restart of the Rundeck server. It will simply hot load as part of the running Rundeck service. If you needed to uninstall or update the plugin, you can simply remove that file from that plugin or overwrite it. As you get into more follow-ups of overwriting and versioning your plugins, that's where some of the other attributes in your plugin description will come in handy for releasing new upgrades to your plugin. So a very simple process of folder structure with 2 folders, 1 descriptive YAML file, and your script. a zip file that you can now just drop into your Rundeck libx folder with all of the rest of the plugins for the platform. As I get ready to jump in, there are other areas where you can get more examples of plugins if you're looking to zoom in on some examples of plugins. As I mentioned before, the Rundeck community already comes with hundreds of different plugins and implementations of different services. You can come to the Rundeck GitHub page and view all of the different plugins there, and actually download these plugins and use them to bootstrap your development for new projects and integrations. There's also several how-to videos and code examples available on the documentation site for you to get started with and work through see different examples of the plugin being implemented. So with that, let's jump in and start looking at some of the different ways that we can implement this plugin from a starter point with our script. So I'm going to go ahead and begin by sharing our new plugin setup. And I've shifted screens now. So what I want to do is go ahead and take us into the development of our Hello World plugin. And I'm going to begin by just coming into Rundeck. And here in Rundeck, I'm actually running the Rundeck community version here. So I'm running our latest Rundeck community version here, and I'm running it locally on my system. So I am a Mac user, so I'm running it locally on my Mac. Rundeck runs on both Linux and Windows. So really, it's a great way to get started with Rundeck if you haven't played with it already. Downloading the community version and just kind of diving in. I've also gone ahead and created a single project in Rundeck that I've just named development for us to kind of work through. So I'm going to dive into my project. I don't have much in my Rundeck setup here today. I will go over here on the left-hand side and navigate to nodes. And for my nodes setup, I actually do have two single nodes. One is my host node. And if I click on that, I can see that, yes, there it is. It's running on my Mac, my local Mac. There I am. And if I have one additional node configured, and this is for my EC2 instance. So I've actually have a EC2 instance running out there for the purposes of this demonstration. So this is what I'm actually connecting to and actually gathering information around. So now with Rundeck, I can start to define my workflows to dispatch and run automation on this specific remote node. I do have one example job already set up for us here. So if I click on it, I have remote sample job. And if I look at the definition of that job, it simply has one step that's just gathering the host name for whatever node it's dispatched to. And that's just to give us some background that this job is actually being dispatched and run on an EC2 instance. So if I go ahead and run that job, I can actually come back and see I'm getting the host name of my EC2 instance. So I can see I'm in the West, I can see all my domain information, I can see the IP address being provided back. So this is just to give us some grounding that this has been done. So now what I want to do is turn to my plugin development. So as I look at my plugin development, and I talked about it in the presentation piece, I actually have two files here. One is actually just a Hello World plugin root directory, and one is a zip file. So if I actually go into my Hello World root directory, within there, I can see that I actually have, let me get a better listing, 3 levels. I have my plugin.yaml. As I mentioned, that is the declarative definition for your plugin implementation. I have a contents folder. This is where I would place any scripts that I'd be executing as part of my plugin. And I have a resources folder. And again, this is where I would place any UI elements. And all of that together, I have zipped and placed into a high-level Hello World plugin zip. What I'd like to do is actually dig into that a little bit more. For my development environment, I'm using VS Code. So I've now switched my screen to VS Code. I have that same structure that we were just looking at here before. But now I'm going to actually dig into the zip file itself. And VS Code actually provides some nice utilities. I can actually open the zip file itself, make edits to any file in the zip, have it saved, and it still remains in the zip. So in future series, we'll talk about how to set up a proper development environment for working rapidly with your plugin, with your plugin development. There are lots of great options for working with your plugin development. If you're interested now, there are examples on the rundeck.com plugin development site, but we'll also talk about that in the future. But for today's setup, I just have VS Code giving me a hand so that I don't have to keep zipping and unzipping my unzipping my plugin archive. So from VS Code, I can actually go in and browse, and I can actually see the same YAML that I was working through. Here's my main section for my YAML. Here's my metadata configuration defining the implementation, as well as the various service that I'll be working from in Rundeck, and as well as all of the configuration information that I have. So that is my plugin setup right now. What I can do is now take this plugin, this zip plugin I have, and simply go ahead and drop it into Rundeck, into our libext directory. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I'm going to just simply do that by taking that zip archive, and I'm going to copy it into my Rundeck lib directory. So if I go ahead and just do that, I've copied that in just to give you an idea. For my Rundeck base, I have a Rundeck base here, and I've simply defined that as a variable that goes directly to my Rundeck libext directory. So if I do a listing of that, I can see all of the plugins that I have, as well as I've just placed Hello World in there. Let's look at it from a longer listing here. So here are all my plugins. I can see I just dropped this in for Hello World, but here are all my plugins that are currently set in my Rundeck environment. So if I now shift back to Rundeck, and I'm going to actually go ahead and edit my Rundeck job. And if I come over here to add a step, I can see now I have a plugin here that's listed as hello world.bash. I can see I have a little icon here that's just kind of the default icon representing my Hello World plugin. Here's my user input. I can now customize this. So now really from the standpoint of your plugin, you can have custom inputs. You can have custom validations on your inputs. You can prompt your users accordingly, and you can control the output. All of this now becomes reusable, it becomes secure, and it can be shared across projects. So if I now save my new configuration of my plugin and run my job this time, you can see it's dispatched to my lone Linux node here. I had my original command, and now I have my new Hello World plugin that's running the hostname command on the new system, as well as taking input from my user. So if there were other pieces I wanted to use to drive my script, whether it was Bash or Python, I can now have user inputs to drive that, and I get custom output. So if I wanted this custom output in any format, maybe I want to create my own JSON format, maybe I want my own logging format, I now have complete control over my plugin. I can continue to take this further by coming back to my plugin development screen. And if I wanted to continue updating this, you can imagine now if you're revving this type of information, I can simply jump into my plugin and I can keep adding configuration lines to it directly from my plugin definition. So again, as you become more familiar with what you are looking for in your plugin, you can get very specific and detailed in how you configure your plugin. For my purposes, I just want to add a new user input to it. I'll keep it as a string for now. I'll give them unique names. So these names need to be unique so that from within Rundeck, it knows exactly that this value for this config represents this provider and this plugin. So these values will need to be unique. So I can give those each unique values. My titles don't need to be unique. They're just strings that are defining that, but the names would need to be unique. So, and the descriptions don't need to be unique. I can just leave that there. So if I actually go ahead now and simply save my plugin, I could also come in and quickly make changes to my script. Let's say I just want to do hello you, add another option to my host name. So now I've made some quick edits, and all of these again are saved directly into my zip. So I don't have to rezip and rebundle, but really it's so easy for you to now make these edits, come back into your folder, rezip and rebundle. I'm just going to go ahead and from my history, copy my new plugin in to that base. And if I take a look at it now, I should have a Hello World plugin that's just got updated. So I know it's been updated from the time I copied it in. And now if I come back to Rundeck, and I'm going to come back over to my job. And let's go into editing my job here again. If I come back into my Hello World plugin, you'll see I actually have a new user input. So just that fast, I was able to hot load that change. You would naturally have more of a graceful release process. You wouldn't be hot loading changes and versions, but showcasing the idea that it's really easy and quick to build these script plugins that I can now reuse. So the important thing here is, even though I added this, I'm not actually exposing it in my script. So I won't see user 2 input because I didn't actually expose it in my script. But I quickly exposed it in my plugin. I could go back and edit that. I did change the host name, so I'm getting the full host name just like I was getting here. So now those match. I can change this because what I'm getting here is this is based on the idea that Rundeck only knows this as value user 1 or 2. So if I actually came back, I've only got one input that I'm providing, value user 1 or 2, and right, I have 2 different values. So you can see where the uniqueness comes in, and all of these details of how these attributes get used are available for you in the documentation setup. So as the last thing now, if I just said, oh, I really made that mistake, I didn't want that, I wanted just value user 2 to be exposed. As the last thing, I'll do that. I'll copy my new plugin into place. And if I come back to Rundeck one last time, let's go ahead and rerun. There it is. I quickly changed that, hot loaded it back in, got the new value, and I'm still getting all my input. So you can see from a process, you can quickly and easily take just your common shell scripts that you have as part of your DevOps environment for monitoring, running scripts, deploying, staging, patching, all of your servers, be they in the cloud, be they hybrid and on-prem, and have them bundled and wrapped into a reusable plugin that now I can share amongst users and projects. I can define the various common inputs that I want from my builders and have this done in a reliable, safe, and secure manner for re-execution throughout as part of any Rundeck workflow that I have set up. So with that, I do want to pause and take a step back and start to open the floor for questions. What this has done again is set that groundwork for getting developers started with working with Rundeck, working with your own Rundeck custom plugins, and hopefully showing how easy it is to just grab those, to just put wrappers around any utility that you have to start executing it within your workflow.
So it was great. Thanks, Craig. So if anyone has questions, you can use the Q&A section of the Zoom to post some questions. We did have one question come up while you were chatting. Do plugins developed in community work in enterprise? And the answer to that is yes, they work the same. Enterprise is built from the community code set, so everything works the same from there. And the first question that we got in was, after deleting the new plugin, does it go away from the existing job definitions, or do we need to edit the jobs?
You would need to edit it would go away from the job definition, and ultimately it would be an error. So imagine now Rundeck is in that job definition looking for a plugin that you've deleted. So if you're updating the plugin, that would be different. It will remain in the job definition. And hopefully you saw from my example, I didn't delete my plugin. I simply just updated, I revved it, and it remained there. If you actually chose to delete the plugin and it was still part of the job definition, it would go away. It wouldn't be available to the job definition, but it would still be there and it would be an error. So if I were to show you a case right now, I could just delete my plugin. It'd still be in the job, but it would be an error.
Greg Jacobs asked, any examples of a UI plugin endeavor features available? I'm going to take that one and I'm going to go dig and see if I can find an open source example. I know there's one out there somewhere. So while I look for that, maybe Craig can grab one of the next ones.
Sure, Craig, we had another question come in, this one from John. He asks, any special considerations for plugins when running Rundeck on a Windows server?
Nothing different from how you would set up and ultimately deploy the plugins. The process is all the same, and that's actually part of the reusability from how the Rundeck how Rundeck is deployed as a Java, as part of Java and JVM. So there's nothing different that comes into mind. What I have seen, and there are examples within our plugin archive and community. If the language you were using in Windows was PowerShell, for instance, you might have different configuration pieces that you would add for PowerShell, but the mechanics would all be the same.
Great, thank you. Are there any, Niley asks, are there any specific considerations surrounding variable expansion and variable namespaces? Do we need to have accept env enabled for remote node plugins? I feel like I might not be reading that one right, Craig. So if you want to take a look at the Q&A.
Yeah, no, let's certainly make sure, and I'm looking at that now. It's the second one, Tracy, and I'm just reading it now, and thank you for the question. Any special considerations for variable expression and variable namespaces? No, there are none that are at least part of the plugin development spec. Do we need to have accepted environment and enabled for remote node? Do we need to have an accepted environment enabled for remote node plugins? The only thing you would need for remote node plugins is to make sure that you specify the Rundeck service type of remote node plugins. So there are several different service types for Rundeck and for within the Rundeck service space, and maybe I might be able to showcase some of those. The only thing you need to do in the plugin is to make sure you specify which service you're declaring your plugin for. So if it's remote node execution, there is a service type for remote node execution. There is one for just local node execution. There is one for logging and events. You would just need to make sure you specify that in your plugin definition, and that's in that YAML file. So, and what I'd like to do is maybe just share. I know we have Forrest going through a few things, but maybe just share a little information here on some of the plugin setups. So if you're actually seeing my screen right now, the plugin, this is the Rundeck community plugin site. So again, this is a great way to bootstrap and get started with plugins if you're getting started with plugin development. Hello World is just the idea of getting you through the mechanics and what's in a plugin spec. But now if I actually want to go in and develop a particular plugin, maybe I'm looking for something with PowerShell. Maybe I'm looking for something to help me with some other steps related to AWS. Maybe I'm looking for some Kubernetes steps. But these are a great way to get yourself started with an initial plugin. So if I actually come into the plugin itself, I can see it's actually leveraging what language is leveraging. It's leveraging PowerShell. But if I actually come into the plugin itself, I can see all of the different pieces that we discussed. You'll see a few additional pieces here just because they're actually part of our repository. So you'll see a few things such as READMEs. We also have additional build files to help you with doing all of the building and packaging that I just did as part of my VS Code. But it all results in the same thing of just kind of creating that archive that is just a zip file when it's all said and done. If I actually go into one of the different plugin definitions here, I can see, again, I have that plugin.yaml. And if I come into my plugin, you'll see I have those same sessions. I have the main session that defines all of the versions. Again, author and date, again, good pieces. Now you can see while they're optional, I can come in and see who's actually the owner, when was last updated. To the question that just came in, I can now see that this is actually defined as a remote node step plugin. So there's that service definition that lets me know that this PowerShell execution will be for remote remote workflow steps. And then from there, all of the same things that I started doing, which is providing different configure information inputs for the user. So I have multiple different inputs that I could then provide for this user that includes everything from just strings to various Booleans that you'd want to pass to your script. So again, that complete customization of my wrapper. Maybe looking at another one of the questions and a follow-up. So variables like RD-foo will expand remotely. Yes. So any of the Rundeck context variables can be passed directly to the plugin. So if that's the question, I think from the QA, if you're thinking about some of the context variables that are available in Rundeck, you can now reference those directly in the plugin yourself as RD underscore context underscore X blah. So there's a complete listing of the various Rundeck context variables and some examples on how to pass them in. But it is just as simple as defining the variable in your script or program. And as long as you know what that variable is in the Rundeck context. And again, complete listings of what those variables are and what's available.
There was a question to send a URL in the chat from Rogerio. I missed the timing on which URL you were asking for, so happy to do that if you can clarify which one you were looking for. Everything that Craig talked about should be on docs.rundeck.com, buried in there somewhere, or the other URL with the plugin. We didn't share the plugins repository URL, so let me send that one. And Scott has another question. And if you're working on a question, you're still typing it, feel free to raise your hand and just let us know so that we don't close the chat before you, or close the Zoom before you get a chance to ask your question. So Scott has, I have a node source script plugin to pull nodes from Active Directory. One of the issues I've run into is the script runs too frequently. Craig, unless you know off the top of your head, I don't think that's configurable today. I can confirm with my development team and provide a follow-up answer in the community forums. But I don't believe that you can configure how often those node scripts run, because there's a variety of actions. Like it tends to be triggered, right? So if you go and run a .star on the nodes page, it's going to run the node sources to get the latest update. But I know that question has come up before, so let me get a little bit better comprehensive answer on that.
Yeah, and a few more coming in for us, so I'll just go down the list. I think the next one is, can we create a plugin in community if it has an enterprise version already to it? And I've seen this before, where we already have either enterprise version of plugins or supported plugins, and users will want to take that as a base, as a bootstrap, and create something different and new, and then share it back. So I've always said, if it's something, I would always say, first and foremost, think about plugins from a community standpoint. Again, they're open, they're for everybody. So the short answer is yes. But the idea for community is that you want to push something back to the community to share, hopefully to encourage others to engage with you, engage in the development cycle of it. Again, that's what our community is, and it's very much supportive. So if you have an idea on an enterprise plugin and you want to augment it or make it better and then push it back in, you're certainly welcome to do such a thing. I think where the enterprise plugins themselves come in and they're so attractive is that from an enterprise standpoint, we are maintaining them. It means that we're updating them and revving them. So if there was something you wanted to see in an enterprise plugin, I might say you might go as far as just to put in a request to us and say, here's something that would go really nice in one of these enterprise plugins. And then we become your development force, if you will. So I think that's one way of looking at enterprise plugins. Again, never want to stop anyone from producing plugins, but on the enterprise side, if it's something we can do, just put in a request and we're glad to make updates to the already enterprise plugins. Another question, I think someone was just asking, what was the name of the PowerShell plugin I was just looking at that went away? And I would say right away, come again, if you're seeing my screen, come again to the Rundeck plugins page. So this is git.com Rundeck dash plugins. And you can actually search our entire plugins repository. So I think I was just searching under PowerShell as an example, and I can see several different PowerShell examples that we have here. Maybe I just want AWS plugins, and I can search and see some AWS plugins. I can see some that are written in Java. Here is one where it's just written in Python. So if I come into the contents sample here, I can see all of the scripts here are just Python scripts that are then being executed in the background as part of the plugin, definition. So all the plugins are here in plugins.com. So you can come here and instantly search and see, and again, get started with these.
You can see there that our one of our founders was the last one to commit to that.
That is
yeah.
indeed.
I believe that one is actually that you picked one that might be quite old and has been superseded at this point, but there's still valid examples of how to approach the plugins.
Exactly. You can see here, even just from the plugin build steps, again, it results in a zip and a copy into libext. so again, valid examples.
I have a question for the group, actually, if you're willing to provide it in chat. Is this was step one of getting used to plugin development. What types of content would you be interested in as a follow-up? There's a lot of different directions we can go, and Craig and I were talking about just before we got started with this about creating more content around this series and this topic. So if you have other types of content that we could carry forward in this as sort of a plugin development series, feel free to drop that in the chat. Okay, so a deeper dive on node source and GUI plugins. So iterating on the different types of plugins that Craig's showing here on the screen, right? There's lots of different areas where Rundeck can take a plugin and enhance or improve the functionality that Rundeck offers. So diving into those various types and maybe discussing, going along the lines of the question you were asking, what are the gotchas, what are the things to consider, and what are the types of things we've seen folks do with this.
And I think just to add on to that, what I've seen from working with customers in the field on developing their own plugins is what it'd be interesting to see if the group is if it would be interesting to see a practical use case example. So oftentimes I'm curious if practical use case examples and building a plugin that's based around an actual customer case is useful for the group. Again, it tends to be more specific because it's focused on a use case follow, but hopefully it gives the group or anybody watching a broader example of here was a challenge, here's why it was important, and here's how they solved it and the type of plugin they built around it.
Yeah,
so
I know there's at least one person on the call that's written a few of these themselves. If you're willing to, or you're allowed to talk about the use case without mentioning, anything sensitive, you can raise your hand. If not, Craig, what are some of the use cases that you've come across?
And I think, by the way, someone did raise their hand, so we'll see if they'd like to chime up a really quick use case that I came across with a customer, and then I'd love to introduce whoever raised their hand. That'd be great to hear their use case. A use case I came across with a customer, and this also even piggybacks on the ask of someone saying, is there other enterprise plugins we can develop? Is we had customers working with different cloud services. So Rundeck already provides a series of plugins across all the different cloud providers you can imagine, from Google to Azure to Oracle to AWS. They were working on a different cloud provider, a much smaller one at the time, and they were looking to create a plugin that would handle connections, node connections to that specific cloud. And they wanted to wrap those node connections in a nice experience that's now reusable and secure. And they could control how the connections take place, how long the connections last, the token and keying process for connecting. So again, it was a great use case. Again, we're covering all the major clouds and then some, but here was a customer that was working on a very small implementation of it. So it was really valuable to them because now it opened the door for all of their cloud services. It became a foundational plugin for them in the sense that now it could be shared across all of their users. And it also opened the door for them to get more out of Rundeck and even kind of proceed into the enterprise level, because now it was at a state where it's more secure and reliable for that delivery. So I'll stop there because there was someone who raised their hand, and I would love to hear from
Scott's
someone
got
on the
his
phone.
hand raised there.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to chime in. I developed a couple of plugins surrounding Active Directory. We run Rundeck in a large Windows environment, and we had a need to extract nodes from our existing Active Directory, both on a group basis and from an OU organizational unit basis. And so I put together a couple of small plugins to do simply that and just import nodes from our Active Directory. I'm also working on another one. We use SolarWinds as a monitoring tool, and I'm working on another one to draw in nodes from that as well. I will say, in terms of an enterprise, an idea for enterprise plugins, having a couple of Active Directory plugins baked in would be a boon to most Windows customers.
Yeah, we've had that request a few times, and even had one of our past solution consultants put a few together as well. I need to revisit them because I think they were just kind of based on simple scripts. And when we go to put something into production, our engineering team makes them quite a bit more robust and bulletproof. So yeah, I can carry that in, and I'll add that basically to our enhancements list so that we can start getting some internal opinions and thoughts on it.
I think a last note that I might share as we're going into is that we talk about plugins in that in the two areas. There's the community, and obviously we're always encouraging and looking to develop our community and that sharing of plugins. So it's great to hear that particular plugin story. But there's also the idea that you're developing plugins that are just for your own internal use. So you can actually have your own internal plugin archive that you set up in Rundeck and that you're pulling from there. So you can imagine where you just kind of have your own internal set where you're deploying plugins and sucking them in to your and deploying them into your own Rundeck environment. So there is a thought process around that as well too. So thinking I might include that, how you might maintain your own kind of plugin archive that you develop that are just developed internally that you may not necessarily be pushing back to the community. Again, the idea behind them is to help you enhance your workflows. We always hope that there's great donations there, but there's a lot of great things that just happen in plugins that are only internal to your organization.
One question that we regularly get, in your example used a bash script, but customers often ask, can we write it in our favorite scripting language like Ruby or Python or something else?
And the answer is yes. So, and that's really why the script plugin is a really attractive and one of the most attractive options to get started with plugins, because it really is up to you. You can really choose the language of your choice. As Forrest just mentioned, I'm using Bash. The plugin the scripting I placed into my contents folder could have really been anything. It could have been Python. It could have been Ruby. In fact, if you go out to our rundeck.com plugin site on GitHub, you'll actually see different examples of different types of scripts. Our Kubernetes plugin is actually built on Python. but it could easily be Ruby. I've seen customers use Perl for those who are still out there using Perl. But anything that is any language you're comfortable with, that is the encouragement of a script plugin. And it really just becomes a wrapper for you around that utility.
And in order to support that language needs to be on the Rundeck server. So if I'm going to run a Ruby plugin, I need Ruby on that Rundeck server.